We finally have some good season 22 news, and that's in the form of exotic changes alongside some ability changes. Now in this video specifically, I just want to go over all the changes and give my opinions on everything. I'm not going to read everything verbatim because I'm sure many of you have already done that. But starting off with hunters, we have the knucklehead radar getting changed. This is essentially going to be getting the foe tracer exotic built into it. So now when enemies get weak, you're going to mark them and you do a little bit more damage to them. On top of that, it also will keep its existing benefits. So that means you still will get that enhanced radar when you're crouched, and you can also aim down sight and keep your radar up. So overall, this is going to be a pretty strong PvP exotic in my opinion. I already thought knucklehead radar was kind of just an okay exotic. It was nothing that ever was the best thing in the game, but adding this extra benefit, because I know some hunters do like to use foe tracer, this could potentially be really good just for a more scouting playstyle. But since they're adding foe tracer to knucklehead radar, that means foe tracer obviously is going to have some changes. And what they did is actually pretty cool. They said they took inspiration from monochromatic maestro, which if you don't remember was a artifact perk. When you dealt damage with abilities, you would get more damage with a weapon matching that ability type. But essentially this does the same thing. So when you deal damage with one of your abilities, you gain a damage bonus with weapons that have damage types matching your subclass damage type. But additionally, when you defeat an enemy that you've damaged with one of your abilities, either with another ability or with a weapon type matching that ability type, you will actually spawn a collectible element. So that means you do things like onyx traces, fire sprites, stasis shards, any of them you can think of, you'll be able to spawn them with this. So you're essentially getting more damage, and on top of that, also the ability to spawn these subclass intrinsic collectibles. So I think this could be really good for PvE. Obviously for PvP, I don't know if it's going to be as good as it once was, but again, knucklehead radar is going to have that now, so you can just run that. But for PvE, this could have some really fun potential depending on the amount of damage increase that you get, alongside being able to same abilities with being able to make these collectibles all the time. I think this definitely could see some potential play. It's definitely a good just neutral game exotic because it'll work with every subclass. Then I'm excited to test it out and see how it's going to perform. So next up we have Lucky Raspberry, and they say Lucky Raspberry is a little bit too unreliable in its current form. So if you don't know, this is the exotic that basically tries to buff your arc bow grenades. It can chain more lightning and you get your grenades back faster. So they're kind of changing that up a little bit. It's still going to be able to chain the arc bolt, and that's kind of the whole point of the exotic. But now instead of the grenade coming back, depending on the amount of enemies you hit with those chains, you will now get energy back when you deal damage with the lightning strikes from enemies under the jolting condition. So this means now when you jolt targets, all the lightning hits other enemies will now refund some of your grenade energy, which is cool. Probably going to be a little bit more reliable, especially if you are taking the fragment so your arc grenades can jolt targets. So going to be just some immediate regen, so hopefully you can spam grenades. But on top of that, every time you pick up an onyx trace, you gain additional grenade energy. So I'm going to imagine it kind of works something like Fallen Sunstar. You're going to get just a little extra bump to that grenade energy specifically alone. So this could be pretty cool because obviously you can make your grenade jolt targets, which is going to give you energy back, and then also make those onyx traces when you kill jolt targets get even more energy back. So you can probably spam a bunch of these arc bolts and they still will have that additional chain, which means more jolting. And again, I think this could be really cool. On top of that, they also gave the grenade an intrinsic ability to stun overload champions. Now jolt obviously can already do this, but they say now just with the grenade alone, hitting an enemy will stun them, so you don't have to wait to shoot an enemy with the jolt effect on them to stun them. So this is a nice quality of life change. You can just take this, stun overload with the initial grenade hit, then jolt everything to get your grenade energy back, kill some enemies, onyx traces collect, and you probably have another grenade to throw in the next fight. So I imagine this could be pretty fun. And I wish this change would have came this season with all the artifact perks that we have, but I imagine even without those, it's still going to be really good. But again, another one I'm very excited to try out, and I really hope it does make it in-game viable. But then we have the renewal grass, and I know a lot of you are going to be happy with this one. They said we've undone the previous nerf to dustfield grenade cooldowns when using this exotic. So that was a huge change they made back in the day, where they basically made the dustfield grenade have such a long cooldown if you are running this exotic. Now that's removed. So if you're playing into a dustfield build, I know a lot of people like to use frosties right now, but maybe renewal grass is going to come back into play for PvE because you have that increased crystal size, that increased radius. You also get that damage reduction when you're inside the dust field. So I can see this potentially being very strong. And stasis in general is not getting any changes, but Strand is getting nerfed a little bit, so I'd imagine stasis is going to be bumped up a little bit more. Since the spin won't be as potent, we'll get more on that later once we get down in this article. But renewal grass, I think definitely could have a play. I imagine this is also going to be in PvP as well, so for PvP it could be a little bit annoying, but for PvE I'm very excited for this change and very excited to build into more dustfield builds. because this thing can pretty much just take up an entire map. It's going to be very, very good. And now let's move on to Titans. So they actually added a pretty similar benefit to things like Eternal Warrior for a bunch of other exotics and kind of streamlined it, made it a little bit easier to activate. So for Ice Mantle, Doomfang Pauldrons, Path of the Burning Steps, and Eternal Warrior, they're all going to be able to get this stacking damage decrease based on the energy type that they're akin to. So Ice Mantles with stasis, so if you're doing stasis weapon damage, you'll constantly build up a stasis damage bonus. And then for Doomfang Pauldrons, again, it'll be with Void, Path of Burning Steps, Solar, and then with Eternal Warrior, you have Arc. But what's really cool is they added the other benefits. So with Ice Mantle, obviously it's all about popping your class ability. So now when you do that, you immediately get max stacks of this damage bonus. With Doomfang Pauldrons, since it's kind of about buffing your melee, so when you get a melee kill, you'll get immediate stacks of all this damage. Path of the Burning Steps, now you get a grenade kill, you will get all the bonus damage. And with Eternal Warrior, since it's based all around your super, they actually buffed the timer from 10 seconds to 30 seconds. So now you cast your super, you get 30 seconds of increased arc damage, which is obviously very, very strong. So overall, kind of just streamline these a little bit, add the benefit to some other exotics that don't really get to take advantage too much. Things like Ice Mantle, I think this could be really fun. Doomfang Pauldron, since it's mainly a super base exotic, now you get some extra void damage. So this could be pretty cool and excited to mess around with these. There's nothing too crazy, but obviously always more damage is always more damage. But now let's move on to the ACDO feedback bins, which is getting a complete rework. So the way this is going to work now, it's going to mainly take advantage of your armor charge. So with the new perk, when melee hits give you an armor charge, so I assume when you get a melee hit, you get an armor charge now, you will take reduced melee damage when you have that armor charge. So now the melee damage reduction is based on if you have an armor charge, which is pretty cool. Obviously, in PvE, you can take a little bit more advantage of this. In PvP, I'd imagine getting a melee hit to give you an armor charge could be very strong, but I'm a little confused with this wording because I'm not sure if this is saying with the new perk, when we do melee hits, we get an armor charge, or when we take melee damage, we get an armor charge. So either way, I still think this is going to be a pretty cool exotic in PvP and a little bit buff to it in PvE. But now the other change is when you take melee damage, you're going to cause a burst, which is a better thing for the exotic. But now that arc energy will now jolt targets, and the more armor charge stacks you have, the more damage you do. So if you have a heavy armor charge based build, you can stack up a bunch of these, and I imagine getting melee hit in PvE will pretty much just kill an entire room if you have 3 armor charge stacks, because you are going to be jolting enemies as well. And since at PvE it's pretty easy to get armor charge, and also with the added benefit of this exotic also granting armor charge, it can be pretty fun. I don't think it's going to be the next best Titan exotic by any means, and in PvP it was already pretty good, but I'd imagine this is going to be a little bit stronger, because if it is based on when you get a melee hit and get you an armor charge, obviously that could play into a lot of other stuff with things like surges, but I don't exactly know how it's going to work. I think it's still going to be an okay exotic, more of an annoying exotic than it is actually viable, but when someone knows how to play with this, I imagine it's going to be pretty strong. And now Holofire Heart, which used to be one of the best solar exotics in the game for Titans, has drastically fell off because of things like Heart of Endless Light, which they even say right here. But they're going to be changed that, and they have removed the base energy to solar abilities and replaced it with something completely new. So with it now, you're going to have a perk that will let you build more into sunspots, as they state. And they also say we think you'll be seeing many more sunspots on the battlefield as a result. As for the perk that greatly increases your ability to regenerate when your super is fully charged, we left that as is. So you're still going to get that energy when your super's full, which can obviously play into some other builds where you can just spam grenades over and over again. But this other perk that they don't actually talk about, which is kind of weird to me, but we're going to be able to make more sunspots. I guess we can speculate maybe the cooldown to make it sunspots is reduced. Maybe sunspots are more beneficial. Maybe they will give you some more benefits now. Not exactly sure how it's going to work, but obviously if you want to play in the sunspots, maybe this exotic is going to be really good for you. But now let's move on to Warlocks. Now, I'm very excited for some of these because I think these are kind of strong in my opinion. So with Astrocyte Verse, they've added 2 more functionalities to this exotic. So enemies near you when you blink become volatile. So obviously on its own, that's already really cool. You just blink in a group of enemies, blink away from them, they become volatile. You can turn around, shoot them, they all blow up. This is going to be a pretty good PvE exotic if it doesn't have a cooldown, because you can just always make enemies volatile with a jump. So that's really exciting. But additionally, if you're using the Nova Warp super, the Dark Blink ability no longer consumes super energy. So that's where you blink around, and now that's not going to consume super energy if you run in this exotic. In PvP, that's obviously going to be pretty good. Astrocyte Verse is more of a PvP exotic in my opinion, but they're trying to make it more of a PvE, honestly, so you can blink near enemies and they become volatile. I think that could be really fun. I don't know how viable it's going to be because obviously running blink is not the strongest thing in PvE, but for PvP, with that not consuming your super energy now, that could be really strong. And also even making enemies volatile is cool, because if someone's rushing with the shotgun, you can blink away, make them volatile, and do a little bit more damage when you're falling back down shooting them. So I think this is a pretty cool buff overall. Really excited to see how it performs in PvE, and I think it will be more of a PvP exotic, but if it doesn't have a cooldown, you can just always make enemies volatile with a blink. That could be really, really fun. But now we have Geomax stabilizers. Now everybody's been wanting the Geomax to be buff. Obviously they're already pretty good with just the damage it can do, but they completely removed that ability to regenerate that super energy when sprinting, once you get close to the top, and it kind of has killed exotic a little bit, but they are changed that. So they said they're not bringing that back, but they wanted to give players a way to get more super energy. So no matter how charged your super is, so just base super, almost max super, anything, picking up an Ionic Trace while wearing this exotic will grant Guardians additional super energy. So this kind of fixes the PvP aspect, in my opinion, because a lot of people just use this to top off the supers, so they can just always have a lot of supers. Since Ionic Traces aren't being generated as much in PvP, but in PvE, you can generate them a lot. So this just means now every time you pick up these Ionic Traces, you're going to be granted super energy. Now, this is really cool because if you remember way back in the day before the Arc 3.0 changes, picking up Ionic Traces actually already granted you super energy. So I imagine this is going to work very similar to that before they actually changed it with Arc 3.0 coming out. Running something like Cold Heart so you can always generate those Arc Traces just means you can always get your super faster. It's kind of worked like bad juju in a way. I could potentially see this being very good because Geomax Chaos Reach is honestly a pretty good super in the game now with the buffs it did receive. And being able to spam that a lot more often, I think could be very, very strong. Now, Wings of Sacred Dawn. So they wanted to lean more into the orbital weapons platform fantasy so you can just fly in the air. But a big problem with that is when you reload it, you would just float back to the ground. So this exotic will now automatically reload solar weapons, including the one you are holding, from reserves each time you get a kill while aiming down sights. So now you can just fly in the air, constantly get kills, and you just keep flying in the air. I don't really know how well this is going to perform. This just seems like more of a fun exotic. In PvP, maybe you can get some off angles and trick some people, so you can just fly in the air a lot more. They do specifically say to try this one with the Xenophage, so you know you can just kind of float in the air and kill a bunch of mages far away. That's the only real thing I can see beneficial with it. You just kind of very, very far away use a very long range weapon, sniper or Xenophage, anything like that. And you can just snipe enemies down before you actually go into the battlefield, because you can get these crazy little off angles. You know, again, I think this is going to be a fun change. I don't think it's going to be the next day one raid exotic or anything, but it has potential, and you know, it seems to be pretty fun. But moving on to the last Warlock exotic, we're getting changes to the Winter's Guile. So due to the nature of the stasis Warlock melee ability, this exotic was previously a disappointing choice for that subclass. So this is the one where you get melee kills, you get more melee damage. Obviously with Penumbral Blast, it really wasn't that good, but they've added a new perk to this one. So specifically when you are playing stasis, now combatants encased by your Penumbral Blast melee will automatically shatter after a short delay. So this seems pretty cool. So now if you can have a build to constantly get your melee back, and now they're just gonna always shatter on a short delay. So I don't think this is gonna again be the next best thing, but it does seem like a pretty fun exotic if you can build into constantly regenerate your melee ability, because being able to shatter enemies all the time after they've been frozen for a second could be pretty cool. But I don't think this is gonna overtake things that we've already used on the Warlock, but it does seem pretty fun. Now let's move on to some ability previews. So starting off, we have the Towering Barricade, which is gonna get its base cooldown increased from 48 to 70. This is mainly going to be changed for PvP because Titans right now in PvP are just very dominant. They are just by far the best class in the game to play in PvP. The Towering Barricade has been strong for the longest time, and they're finally deciding to make some changes to it. They're also going to reduce the maximum health from 600 to 500. Now, they are going to increase the damage resistance in PvE, so you shouldn't really see a change if you are, using your barricade in PvE, so they won't just instantly destroy it, so that is nice to see. Now, for Striker Titan, Thundercrash is also going to be getting a nerf, so the cooldown is going to be increased from 500 seconds to 556 seconds. It's going to be more in line now and match a bunch of the other roaming supers that we have, so that's going to be a pretty big nerf. Thundercrash is obviously pretty strong in PvP. It does suck to see that it's going to be getting a nerf in PvE, but I don't think it's going to be too huge of a change, and obviously it's going to be way more noticeable in PvP. So Knockout is also going to be receiving a nerf, so now the bonus damage it does to players, which is normally 50, is going to be reduced to 30. Overall, another striker type nerf because they want to get it more in line with a bunch of other subclasses. So with all this and the towering barricade nerf, I'd imagine it's going to tone them down a little bit. I still think they're going to be extremely strong, but overall, these are some nice changes to see. And now we can move on down to Strand, as they already said they're going to be nerfing Suspend and buff some other parts of it. So Suspend, they're going to reduce the suspend duration versus non-champion PvE combatants from 8 seconds to 5 seconds. So it's going to be a 3-second nerf. I still think 5 seconds overall is still going to be pretty strong. You can just suspend up any major enemy that can't really do anything for 5 full seconds. Should give you enough time to kill them. Threat of Continuity will extend the duration to 7 seconds now instead of 12 seconds. So now that 5 seconds can be increased to 7 seconds if you are running Threat of Continuity. So again, 7 seconds of enemies not really doing anything. It's still going to be pretty strong in my opinion, but it is going to be more aligned, so they just can't sit in the air for 12 whole seconds. And you actually have to focus on killing a suspend target now instead of just kind of let it sit there and doing other things. Now they also have reduced the base suspend duration versus champions down from 8 seconds, which is the normal, to 3 seconds. Now that's obviously a little bit more crazier than the other change, because now when you suspend a champion, obviously suspend pretty much counters every single champion other than overload, but you can just stun them. You pretty much just have free reign to kill this champion. You don't really have to worry about it. So now you're only going to have 3 seconds to try to burst this champion down instead of letting it just sit there for 12 seconds. And again, you kind of just do whatever you want to. But with Threat of Continuity, it will be buffed to 4 seconds, obviously only at an extra second. It's not going to be too crazy, but it is a little bit of a buff. And I still think Suspend is going to be pretty good, but you're just going to have to play into it a little bit more now. And you can't just kind of like suspend targets, run away. You're going to have to actually try to burst down whatever you suspended almost immediately, or they're just gonna come back down to the ground. Now they also did increase the snap damage dealt to suspended boss targets by 67%. If I had to guess, what this is saying is now just when you try to suspend a boss, and bosses can't be suspended, they're just increasing that damage by a lot, but the damage already doesn't do a whole bunch in general. So you know, overall it's gonna be a buff. I don't really know how it's gonna perform though. We'll just have to kind of wait and see. But the main thing is that suspend timer nerf, which is going to be something that we all have to get used to. Now, Threat of Mind is also getting some changes. So this is the one when you kill enemies that are suspended, you get some class ability energy back. This is mainly going to be targeted towards hunters and titans, since they have aspects that can make their class ability suspended enemies. But now when you kill minor combatants, instead of getting 15% energy, you're only going to get 10. Major combatants, you'll get 15% energy instead of 25%. And then on bosses, champions, or mini bosses, it's going to be reduced from 50% to 25%. So some pretty major nerfs to a bunch of these. With minors going from 15 to 10%, I don't think that's going to be too crazy, but with majors and champions getting reduced, that is going to hit pretty hard. So overall, I still think it's going to be a pretty strong fragment to take, because obviously just getting your class ability energy back is always nice. But again, you do have to remember this is based on killing suspended targets, and with the suspend nerf, I'm not exactly sure if people are going to be running this as much anymore, since they are also buffing other parts of Strand. And now for Threat of Generation, this is the one when you deal damage, you get grenade energy. So this is going to reduce the overall energy gain per damage event against PvE combatants by about 20%. So pretty much you're going to be returning your grenade 20% less now. Now they also have completely rebalanced it, so now precision weapons can actually get pretty much the same amount of energy as, you know, say something like an auto rifle or just any rapid fire weapon. So that's pretty cool. So overall, it's going to be a little bit more reliable, and you can use kind of whatever weapons you want to use if you are running this fragment. But in general, you're going to see pretty much a 20% reduction to the amount of energy gain you get. I still think this is going to be really strong, and since it does open up so you can use a little bit more options now instead of always trying to run whatever weapon that gives you the most energy, I think this could be a pretty good change, but it is still overall going to be about a 20% nerf. But again, I still think it's going to be pretty good. Now we move on down, we have threatenings. Now this is a big one because threatenings are pretty good in normal content. Once you get to end game content, they're pretty terrible. So they're actually going to be increasing the threatening damage against PvE combatants by 30%. So all the threatening based builds, I know I'm extremely excited for this, just to try to be able to save as many threatenings as possible. Hopefully they're going to be very viable in in-game content. Now, I don't imagine they're going to one-shot enemies and things like GMs, but maybe on lower tier enemies like thralls, it possibly could, but hopefully they'll just be doing a little bit extra chunk of damage to what they currently do. We'll just have to wait and see. Now, Tangles are also going to be getting a buff, so they're going to reduce the cooldown of Tangles from 15 seconds to 12 seconds. So this is going to be very strong as well. A 3-second buff is honestly really nice, and being able to play into these tangles a lot more is going to make tangle based builds a lot more viable, specifically with things like the Swarmer. So again, destroying a tangle will make threatlings. Threatlings are also getting a buff. I would imagine a Swarmer Warlock is going to be extremely potent now, and now they're also going to be buffing Sever. So now Sever enemies will do 40% reduced damage instead of 30%. I still don't think Sever is going to be the greatest thing in the game. Obviously, with things like the Titan, with your melee ability being able to sever enemies, or even the Hunter, it's pretty nice because if you're playing a Titan with their super, you got to be up there melee enemies anyway. So Sever is really nice in that instance. But for fragments that, you know, that basically make enemies sever or just anything of the sort, it's not the craziest thing. I'd imagine severing a boss is going to be a little bit better now, because obviously a boss doing 40% reduced damage is nice, but I still don't think this is going to overtake Suspend, even though it did get a nerf, and obviously Threatening's getting a buff. It's still going to be kind of overshine by both of those in my opinion. Now Silk Strike's going to be getting a buff in PvP. It was already an okay super, but they're going to be increasing the damage resistance from 40 to 45%, so hopefully you can survive a little bit longer. They're also going to reduce the suppression time between the Silk Strike super air attack, so that's going to be pretty cool. So hopefully it's a little bit more reliable. And then it's going to reduce the vertical lift provided by Silk Strike heavy air attacks to reduce instances of missing the primary target. So hopefully now it's just going to be a lot more reliable. You can hit your enemies when you want to hit them, and that damage reduction is obviously going to be a pretty nice increase as well. And now they're also going to be making some changes to the Threaded Spectre aspect. It was already pretty good in PvP, but in PvE, obviously making that clone was not the strongest thing. So they're basically going to increase the lifetime of that clone from 10 to 12 seconds. That's nice. It also has more health against PvE combatants now, so they can't just instantly destroy it. The Threat Spectre now takes longer to detect nearby PvE combatants at the beginning of its lifetime, and PvE combatants will now more consistently focus on the Threat Spectre instead of the Hunter, and then allied players will no longer have reticle magnetism toward the Threat Spectre. So overall, now it's going to have a little bit more lifetime. It's going to have more health in general. Enemies are going to be attracted to it more, and now your allies won't accidentally try to hit Threat Spectre and actually can focus on killing the PvE enemy. So overall, I think this is going to be a pretty good change. I don't know if it's going to make this aspect extremely strong in PvE, but having enemies not be able to shoot you is going to kind of work as a blind in a way, and being able to spam these a lot if you are playing into your class ability. And this also does make Threatlings, which are also going to be getting a buff. So this could be pretty strong. I want to test out and play with this a little bit more. And who knows, maybe we'll get an exotic that plays into it some with next season. So it could potentially be pretty good. These are some nice changes for sure. Now the Wanderer is also going to change. I made a video way back at the start of the season, and obviously a lot of other people were complaining about how bad this aspect was. Pretty much just made the normal tangle just worse overall, so they're completely changed that. So now whenever you destroy a tangle, it will create a delayed suspending burst, so you don't have to pick it up anymore. You can just shoot the tangle now and it will suspend enemies, which is extremely nice, because normally you had to go pick it up, throw it, and then it would get that bonus. So now just being able to shoot it, very, very nice. But again, you do have to remember Suspend is getting a nerf, so it won't be as strong as Suspend currently is in the game. But overall, again, just being able to shoot a tangle and suspend enemies is nice. It's also going to increase the Suspend detonation radius from 6 to 7 meters against PvE combatants. So it's going to kind of work similar to the very first artifact perk we had with the launch of Lightfalls. So now your tangle explosion will have a big radius, and it will also suspend enemies. So again, think that's going to be pretty strong in my opinion. And then also increase Thrown Wanderer Tangle detonation to match a standard Tangle detonation. So again, that was a huge problem because it reduced the damage. So now whenever you throw the Tangle at an enemy, it will do the normal amount of damage and still also do the suspending burst. So overall, Wanderer getting some pretty crazy buffs in my opinion. I think this is going to be a very strong aspect, and also with the buff to tangles going from 15 seconds to 12 seconds, you're going to be able to use this a lot more often. And I think it does have potential to be one of the best Warlock aspects in the game. And now for grapple, the grapple melee will now always take priority while active, regardless of whether or not the target is within range. This is a great change to make it more reliable. I get so tired when I'm trying to grapple melee enemy and then my normal melee comes out. So hopefully this is going to make grapple builds a lot more effective, just because it's a whole lot easier to use. So you know, that's just a pretty good overall change in my opinion. Now we're also going to be getting some fragment changes. So Thread of Propagation is now going to be getting 10 strength. Thread of Continuity is now no longer going to grant 10 strength because that fragment was already extremely strong. Thread of Wisdom no longer will require a precision kill to activate, which is going to be pretty good. Thread of Isolation will reduce the number of precision hits required to activate by average about 30%. So again, just overall buffing that fragment a little bit. And then for the final fragment, we have Thread of Rebirth, which is Overall, again, some pretty big changes. So this is the one where you get a strand weapon kill, it can generate a threat lane. They're basically going to scale this based on whatever enemy you kill. So now minor combatants will generate 1, elite combatants or players will generate 2, and then boss champions or mini bosses can generate 3. So if you are getting strand weapon kills on these elite or boss enemies, you will now just generate more threat lanes, which is nice. Minor enemies always generate 1, so it's not really a change at all. So overall, again, just a pretty nice buff for this. So if you are using it on higher tier combatants, you will generate some more threat lanes, and with threat lane buffs, this could be pretty good. Now, this is all the changes they go over in this article. They do say on launch day there'll be a full list of changes and bug fixes that come out with the patch notes, including a fix for Celestial Fire Scorch not activating melee perks like Sunbracers. So that's going to be another pretty cool change. But obviously, we'll see more when the patch notes come out. And overall, I think these are some pretty cool changes. I'm excited to play with a lot of these new exotic changes. Obviously, I think Suspend did need a little nerf. Titans also needed a little nerf in PvP. So, we're getting that. Also with the threat buffs, several buffs, I'd imagine some new Strand builds going to come along. We're also going to be getting new Strand aspects. They didn't talk about any of that in this article, but I'd imagine coming up soon we'll probably see that. Also, fragment changes as well. Overall, I think this is a bunch of pretty good stuff. Really excited to play with a lot of this, try to make builds with everything, and I'm really excited for the Tangle buff and the Wanderer buff, because I really think that's going to take Strand Warlock up to the next level. But anyways, though, that's going to do it all for me. Let me know what y'all think about these changes in the comments below. If you enjoy, consider doing all the normal YouTube stuff. It really does help support the channel out, and I truly appreciate it. Thank you all so much for watching this one, and I hope you all have a great day. Peace.